Well, good morning. 6th of March 2023. Now, I have no script, as you know. You probably know me. But I'll try to be relatively brief with this, but it is a complex and difficult subject in a way. And why I say that is because I'm a Christian, but I wouldn't call myself a fundamentalist. In other words, I don't accept every word of the Bible as fact or history and what have you. There are a couple of scenarios that I was actually, ironically or whatever, I was talking to my wife yesterday on our way to church, as it turns out, with regard to Noah's Ark. When Pastor Daniel presented this as a very, very well researched and done sort of a sermon there, a very detailed sermon, let's say, the week before. In other words, I'd actually had spoken to him a week previous to that too, on the subject, and said, well, what about the fact that they claim Australian Aborigines have been here between, say, 40,000 and 60,000 years, and there are all these various people. There's only one, as Daniel pointed out, there's only one race, that's the human race, right? But he explains everything in a way that says, well, he explained, as I said, Noah's Ark. Okay. Some of it was exaggerated or whatever, and I explained this later about, you talked about elephants and you talked about lions, and they're not from the region. Oh, that's right. Yeah, well, it only says in the Bible about animals. I said, okay. But here are some of the problems, and I want to ask my Christian friends that I'm addressing this to come up with some thoughts on this, comments on it, and so forth. It's not as straightforward and easy as you might think. So you've got a situation, as I'm going to give you two scenarios, and some Christians believe one or the other of these, by the way. One is, if you take it quite literally, it says that the world was flooded, but I feel, and as a number of other Christians would feel, the world in those days was the Middle East. So you're talking the current countries of Iraq and Iran and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and so on. So, Syria and all the rest of it. So if, in scenario one, there was a flood, Noah, it was all real, so Noah's there, and he gets told by God, in the 600th year, which is interesting, but build this ark. An exact description of what's required in the size and everything else and what was to be done, and all the rest of it was done. Big problems, in my opinion, is, well, I forget how much time he said he had. I think it was quite a long time. It was 50 years or 100 years. He had a certain period of time anyway to build the boat. But first of all, he'd have to create the tools. He'd have to refine the iron and make nails, maybe 10,000 nails, who knows. He'd have to create a sawmill to saw the timber into usable planks, in other words, to build like you would with a house or another timber building. He'd have to do all of that and then put it all together, and I guess his wife and his sons probably gave him a bit of a hand, but basically it's alleged that he does it himself. All right, so far so good. If that was so, he'd have to have all the water and all the food and everything else for the people on board and the animals and so on. And the pastor gave some rather graphic and sometimes funny descriptions about no sewage, that no doubt have to let the sewage out into the ocean that they're floating on, and so forth. But the real problem is when you flood an area, and you can name an area, it doesn't matter where it is, right? for 5 months, which is how long the Bible says it was, and you'd land on top of a mountain that's been rumoured, by the way, and it's been said many times actually, that it might have been Mount Ararat in Turkey. Well and good as well. That'll just show that this petrified object that looks like an ark, in fact, is the ark. Well, that's great. Still got a problem here. So they land on the top of a mountain that has been flooded for 5 months, and the water is now receding to the point where the boat comes to rest on the mountain. They get out of the boat. There is no fresh water. There is no food. There are no animals and birds because they're all dead. What do you eat, and how do you survive until you re-establish food, farming, plants, grow crops? Where do you get the animals from? The animals were breeding, or you'd say, oh, well, the animals were breeding from them. Oh, were they? That's handy that they were breeding on the ark. So then we move forward, and it becomes worse, if you know what I mean, as the sermon goes on. Then you get a situation where the 3 sons head off in different directions, or are told to head off, and off they go. I guess they constructed boats too, because they had to go to different areas. They then go to if you take it literally, an empty world. They then populate different parts of the world. Now, these 3 sons and their daughters, therefore, were responsible for all of the races of the world, whether you're talking Africans and Aboriginals and Asians and people who are remarkably different in some ways. All of that is descended, and we are all descended, in Australia, for example, from Shem, according to the pastor. All very interesting. He talks about melatonin or tonin or whatever, and why the hair is different colour, and why the eyes and the skin and so on. Handy, all right, that's to talk about. But an empty world. So all of the belief, in other words, that Aboriginals came from Africa originally and made their way across through Asia and down may have been a land bridge from New Guinea to Australia, and there was a land bridge from the Australian mainland to Tasmania, let's say 50,000 years ago. If they did have boats, what did they do with them? Because they never used boats after that. No Aboriginal boats around the place. Unlike people from Tonga and Fiji and all these Samoans and that, they all had boats. And they all originally came from Hawaii. That's why you see they've got a lot of similarities, and why they have similar dress and a little tattoo around their wrist or whatever. And their songs and all the rest of it are similar because they are related. But that is the first scenario, in other words, really to focus in on it for a moment, is the flood was a regional thing, and it happened, and then they started again. But where, and as I'm asking all of you this, where then did all of the ants, where all those insects, it started out of Israel, I guess it started off in that area. Are there any birds in Israel? Are there any animals? Are there any insects? The answer, of course there is. Or where'd they come from? It never says in the Bible that God recreated all of the species and variety of life on earth. And incidentally, there are 4 billion species of animals and birds and fish in the world. That's not 4 billion total, that's 4 billion species. So clearly the scenario too, which is the whole world being flooded, just did not happen, could not have happened, because to restart again from that, you've got, first of all, I said no food, no water. So when the flood goes down, you're left with a barren world, and you have to start from there. So they created all those people, all those different nationalities, and clearly different peoples. these are, to my way of thinking, major problems. Now, we do not, as Christians, we do not believe in fairies at the bottom of the garden. We just dismiss that and say, okay. And there's a lot of things we could have caution over and so forth. But we're not asking anyone to believe in things that have got very, very little evidence of them being factual. And I'm not getting into aliens or anything else now, by the way. So I'm sticking right with the Noah's Ark situation, and I'm just saying, I'm putting it to people. This is a very, very difficult issue. And I will not even get into other things that I've spoken about, including Genesis, where there's big problems there because, although I'll just touch on that right now and say because, I accept that scientists have worked out how to measure the distance of galaxies, and they say, well, at least 15 billion light years away is these galaxies, or 13 point something. So who knows whether it's 15 altogether. All right, and I accept that therefore our region, including our galaxy, came about 4 billion years ago. So if God created the universe, I believe he did, and he created basically everything in it. We weren't around until 4 billion years ago, so the story of the Earth being basically the centre of the universe and then working forward from there, and what God did and so on, is not really feasible. Now, I don't care whether people say, oh, you're insulting people, I'm sorry about that, or oh, we believe these things literally, I'm sorry about that too. But I think that it's worthwhile raising issues with people just to get their opinion or discussion on the subject. So for right now, we'll call it quits, let's say, on this one. And I'd like to hear from you. I hope to get civil and polite replies to this. Now, I'm sending it off to some Christian friends of mine, but I'm also going to put it on YouTube in case somebody there is interested in the subject. So thank you for viewing.